Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. So let's get off the phone.
Okay, because there's an echo. Okay.
I'm going to tell Ingrid to get on.
I hear your classical music.
I know. Should I turn it off for him?
Well, you'll have to turn it off when the meeting starts.
Yeah, let me turn off. That'll be funny if you and I are the only ones here.
Yeah. Somebody else, do you know Benji Silverman?
That's our rabbi.
Oh, that's Rabbi Benji. Okay, he appeared briefly on the screen. His title appeared on the screen, but nothing else. I didn't realize that was his last name.
Yeah, same as Edith.
Oh, Are they related?
No, but a few people thought that because she used to go to his
It's
classes.
such a common name. It's such a common name. Like my name is common. And I guess your name is common too.
Not too much.
Yes, it is.
I never met anybody my whole married life.
Well, what about the old banking cartel?
Yeah. Oh, it's a famous name, but I never met anybody particular. I love the name.
Are you related to them?
Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. No, remember, it was ex-hubby's name.
I know. Was he related to them?
No, hardly.
Wow.
They came from a very poor background, struggling. That's another story I'll tell you. Oh, hi.
Hello.
Rabbi Benji, this is my friend. You've met him a few times, Dr. Ed Feinberg. He lives in Phoenix.
Hi, Ed. How you doing?
Hi, fine. How are you?
Good. Doing well. We're going to give everyone a couple of minutes to get on, and then we'll get started.
Okay.
What's doing in Phoenix?
Well, we have the same thing where you can't really do anything. You can't go anywhere, but the weather's great.
That's good. Okay. That definitely helps if you can get outside.
It does help. Yeah, you can go outside every day. So I do.
Right. Good. Very nice.
How's your family? Everybody well?
Yeah, the kids are well, Hinda's well. Thank God.
Thank God, yeah. Mine too. But I'm feeling sad because I don't get to see them in person.
Right. It's hard. That's definitely hard. But the main thing is they're healthy, so God willing, when all this is over,
yes,
we'll spend even more time together.
I'm listening. I'm watching your inspirations every day.
I'm happy you get them. For some reason,
Yeah.
a lot of people are not getting them through text messages. So.
I just wrote to Ingrid to hop on.
Okay.
To remind her.
Right. Okay, we'll start. It's 8:01. Give one more minute because it's only 8:01. Give one more minute.
Okay.
Hello.
Oh.
Hey Ben, is that you? I don't recognize you with the hat on. Ben, is that you? Yes, okay, you're on mute. Okay, we'll give it one more minute, then we'll start. I see Ellen just came on. Ellen, it's really dark in your house, Ellen.
She wanted to be challenging. I want those last three reps. Feel us all the way up. I know Griselle was saying that she could feel the burn earlier.
Okay, we're gonna start another 30 seconds. We'll give it. Okay, 30 seconds. Let's see if people are still coming on, and then we'll start. Hi,
Hi,
Dad.
Rabbi. I may be dropping off of video on and off because we're from listening and paying attention, just getting the kids organized and the kitchen organized while listening.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, here I am.
Okay, we're gonna start. I'm gonna mute everyone for now. Actually, you know what we'll do? We'll try it without mute. Try everyone unmuted, and if it gets noisy, I'll just mute everyone. Some of you are on mute from your own computer, so you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. Okay, so I'm sure you've heard the famous story of the father who calls his grown-up son. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I know Mom and I have been married now for 45 years, but I think it's time for me to move on. And I decided I'm getting divorced. What do you mean you're getting divorced? Are you crazy? You've been married 45 years. Well, now you can get divorced. You gotta be insane. Who's gonna take care of you? Look, it's been a long time. It's time for some change. He said, don't do anything. Let me call my sister. Anyway, he calls his sister, and he says, look, Dad called me, and he said that he's had enough, and he's getting divorced. She starts yelling, that's ridiculous. 45 years of marriage to get divorced now. They can't even look after themselves. They can't do this. I'll take care of it. She calls up her dad. Dad, there's no way you're doing this. Don't do anything. Don't get divorced. Just wait. We're coming over. We're going to talk to you. We're flying over. We'll be there tomorrow. Just wait for us. He hangs up the phone. He looks at his wife, the father, and he says, hey, I think we got them coming for Passover. And they're paying for their own ticket. So this Passover, unfortunately, many of us will not be able to spend it with our families. And this creates a challenge, different challenges for different people. For some of us, the challenge is a very practical challenge. We've never made a Seder before. And that's one challenge. How do you actually make a Seder? What are the practical steps that you do? And then for others, perhaps we've made a Seder before, but it was always together with the family, with the kids or grandkids. And all of a sudden, we're doing it all alone or with our spouse. So at this point, you may be sick of our spouse after 3 weeks of staying home alone. And now we have to sit there and do a Seder together. So how do we make it a meaningful experience? So first of all, I think there is an opportunity. It is different this year. And in a way, it's sad that it's different, that we can't be with the people we're typically with. At the same time, there is an opportunity to have a very, very different type of Seder than what many of us may be used to having. We're used to having a Seder where there's a big family get together and a lot of the attention is drawn away from the Seder to the family gathering, which is beautiful, and we should always have that, but sometimes the Seder is sacrificed as a result. And maybe this is an opportunity to really have a very, very meaningful Seder, which is why, just as a side point, I know some people have been talking about doing a Zoom Seder with the family. I personally would not recommend it. I would recommend you do the Zoom before the Seder. Say you jump to them and then shut the Zoom and have a meaningful Seder, because having the Zoom on by the Seder can really take away from the opportunities that are in front of us at the Seder. But I'll leave that choice for you. So before we get into the practical, we'll spend a bit of time on the practical steps of the Seder. And I'm not sure what everyone's holding. Some of you may be very basic and you're familiar with the basic Seder. And for others, may not be so familiar. So we'll try to spend a little bit of time on the content and then time on the basics of the Seder. So first, I think the key for having a meaningful Seder is to recognize that the Seder is not about the past, it's about the present. And this is probably the biggest mistake we make with most of Jewish rituals. We think of it as something that we're celebrating the past, we're commemorating the past. So the Jews went out of Egypt, so we're remembering that the Jews left Egypt, and we have this whole Seder night. The Jews were traveling in the desert, and they had the Sukkot, they had the clouds of glory protecting them, so we sit in the Sukkah today. And all the different rituals we do are just reminders of the past. At Purim, we celebrate the story of Haman trying to kill the Jewish people, and we overcame him. And the shortcoming of this, or the limitation of this type of Judaism that's kind of stuck in the past, is it's not very meaningful. Because very nice, my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, probably I think 38 generations if you do the math, left Egypt and were freed, but it doesn't really talk to me. I'm free. I live in the States. I'm okay. And why am I still celebrating this? And what's the significance? And especially for teenagers and the younger generation, if it's only about remembering the past, it rings a little bit shallow or hollow. So the key is to recognize that in truth, in Judaism, nothing about Judaism is about the past. As a matter of fact, in Judaism, we don't even have a word, at least in biblical Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, there is no word for history. In modern Hebrew, when they wanted to create a word for history, they actually borrowed from the English language. They call it historia. Because in Hebrew, there's no such word, because we don't believe in living in the past. There's no such thing as history. We do have a similar word in the Torah many times, but it doesn't mean history. It's a little bit different. We have the word zikaron or zecher, which means to remember, memory. Memory is very different than history, right? Even if you look at the word, history is his story. It's some story that took place to other people a long time ago. Memory is my story. It's a part of my being, part of my DNA. It's part of who I am. So when we sit down at the Seder, it's not a history lesson. It's really all about our DNA, who we are as a people. It's really memory more than history. To take it a step further, there was once, they tell the story of a king and his entourage, including his family, are traveling through the desert to a faraway city. And on the way, the prince, the crown prince, starts complaining that he's thirsty. Now, the spoiled prince, when he's thirsty, he's got to have water. Neil, you're upside down. He's got to have water. So the prince, the advisors call an emergency meeting, and they all gather together. How are we going to get the prince water? So there are different groups of people. Some of the advisors say, you know what we're going to do? We can send our horse riders to the closest town, and within 2 hours, they can be back with cold water, fresh water for the prince. The other group of advisors say, you know what we can do? We can start digging. We have enough manpower here. We can start digging. Even in the desert, if we dig long enough, eventually we'll hit water. It may take us 12 hours, but we'll get there with all the manpower we have. Fine. The king says, no problem. We're gonna dig wells. And they start to dig. Eventually, hours later, they get some water. They give it to the prince. He's so relieved. But he says, Dad, I don't get it. Why did you make me wait so long for the water? You could have sent the riders to the closest town. So the king responded, the reason why I did this is if we sent the riders to the closest town, you'd have water today. But in the future, if you're traveling through the desert, you may not have the whole entourage with you, and you'll end up without water. But if we dig wells today, you'll always be able to re-access those wells in the future. As a matter of fact, when we travel through the desert, every few miles, we're going to dig some more wells. And then we'll make a map that tells you exactly where the wells are and how you access the wells. And this way, if you're ever traveling here in the future, you can access these wells. And this story is told as a metaphor for the cycle of the Jewish calendar. When we talk about the Jewish people leaving Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, it wasn't that the 15th of Nisan became special because they left Egypt that day. That day is a holy day. It's like a well in time. There's a certain energy in the world in that day, which is why they left on that day. The fact that Yom Kippur, which was the first time the Jewish people were forgiven en masse, after serving the golden calf, God forgave them on Yom Kippur, on the 10th day of Tishrei. It wasn't that the 10th day of Tishrei became special because God forgave them on that day, but rather the 10th day of Tishrei holds a certain energy that's conducive to forgiveness, and therefore they were forgiven on that day. In other words, every single year on the holidays is a certain energy, a certain spiritual energy that we can access. And it's related to the theme of that holiday. So on Yom Kippur is a time for renewal or forgiveness, and on Passover it's a time to free ourselves. And in order to appreciate that, we have to understand what it even means to free ourselves, because obviously we don't have a Pharaoh standing there with a whip over our head. But at the same time, we do have limitations. Every one of us experiences some form. I'm going to mute everyone because some background noise, but you're welcome to unmute yourself or ask a question in the chat. But every one of us does face some sort of inner limitations. And it can be simple things such as anger, jealousy, it can be an addiction. But there are always these boxes that we find ourselves in. We have inhibitions, and Passover is the ideal time to break out of those limitations, to break free from those limitations. So when we go through the steps of the Seder and we celebrate Passover and we talk about being in slavery and then freeing ourselves, it's not just about the past, it's about today. Recognizing that I find myself within certain limitations, and I need to find a way to grow as a human being, to rise above those limitations this year. And the steps of the Seder are there to help us achieve that state of freedom. So if you think of it this way, all of a sudden, the Seder can take on much deeper significance, where it's a personal journey that I'm taking. It's not just the journey of my ancestors, but it's a journey that I'm taking today. It's a journey that my family is taking today. And seeing it that way helps us see the Seder in a much more meaningful way. So that's all kind of by way of introductions to how we make the Seder more meaningful. So even if you're there without the kids and without the grandkids, just you alone or you with your spouse, this journey is a very powerful journey. And if we do it right, we can really walk away from the Seder, change people a little bit. We're not going to change our whole lives, but a little bit freer than we walked into the Seder. And when you have this in mind, you can really have a very powerful Seder on your own or with your spouse. Moving on, there are certain rituals that we do during the Seder, which again tie into this theme of freedom, allowing us to free ourselves from any inner limitations, such as eating matzah or drinking the 4 cups of wine and the maror. I would say actually there are 3 main rituals to the Seder. One is the matzah, the second one is the 4 cups of wine, and the third one is the Seder plate. Those are the 3 main rituals. These are all very physical acts that we do. And it's important to bear in mind that in Judaism, we very much value physical actions. For example, we talk about freedom, Passover being all about freedom. So God could have said, you know what? This day, the 15th of Nisan, is a very, very powerful day, and it's an opportune time to really free yourself from your limitations. So I want you guys every year on the 15th of Nisan to sit down and meditate on freedom, right? You know what would have happened had God done that? And if the first couple of years, Jewish people would have sat down and meditated on the concept of freedom, or maybe heard a lecture. Every year, the rabbi gives a lecture on freedom. What would have happened is we wouldn't be celebrating the Seder anymore today. That's first of all. Because the power of the Seder is precisely in those very tangible physical acts. We don't just talk about freedom, we taste freedom when we drink the wine. We don't just think about the pain of our experiences or our limitations and slavery, we actually taste it, we ingest it when we eat the matzah, and so on and so forth. So we go through the physical emotions, which is probably why the Seder still exists today. The longest standing ritual on earth is the Seder, precisely because it contains physical rituals, or practical rituals. But in addition, we also believe that the practical actions that we take actually affect our emotions. They elicit certain emotions. So the famous example is, if you take it as an experiment they did with a pencil, right? Had a group of people in a room, and they gave them a pencil and told them, one half of the people, 50%, to hold the pencil in their teeth like this, right? And the other one to hold it this way. Yeah, right? And what they found is that the people who held it the first way, what happened was, when they showed them these cartoons afterwards, they did not find those cartoons particularly funny or amusing. And the second group that were holding the pen the other way, the cross like this, they found those cartoons much funnier. Why did they find it funnier? Because what happens is when you hold the pen the other way, it actually activates your smile muscles. The same muscles you use when you smile, you use when you hold your pen that way between your teeth. On the other hand, when you use your lips and you parse your lips to hold your pen the other way, or the pencil the other way, those are the same muscles you use when you frown. So just a physical act, a very physical act without even intention. You didn't mean to smile, but you smiled, that actually elicits certain emotions. So the same is true when it comes to the matzah and the wine. It's very important not to miss the point and say, well, talk about freedom and celebrate freedom and not eat the matzah and not drink the wine or go through the Seder, because the physical steps have a very potent effect on the way we feel, on our inner being, and probably even more importantly, also spiritually. They also elicit certain spiritual energies. So for example, you take matzah, right? We're told matzah is the bread of healing and the bread of faith. So eating the physical matzah, because ultimately God didn't command us to meditate about matzah, right? And all the themes of matzah, such as humility, which we'll get into later, and so on. God actually told us to eat the matzah. That's the practical mitzvah, eat the matzah. So when you eat the matzah, what happens is it elicits certain, just like it awakens certain things within you physically or in your inner world, it also elicits certain spiritual reactions, and it's conducive to both healing and faith. So I would say it's something that we very much need this year. So make sure you eat your matzah, especially if possible, to get a hold of shmura matzah. Shmura matzah is matzah that was guarded. Shmura literally means guarded. So there's matzah that was guarded from the time the wheat was harvested. And from that very moment on, they watch to make sure that the wheat does not come into any contact with the water, because the moment wheat comes into contact with water, after a certain amount of time, around 18 minutes, the wheat starts to ferment, and then it becomes chametz. It's not valid for matzah anymore. So shmura matzah is guarded from the very beginning of its harvesting, all the way through the entire process, that it doesn't touch water until they're ready to actually bake it. In addition, it's also hand-baked rather than machine-baked, because when you make matzah, you're actually supposed to have in mind that you're doing it for the mitzvah. This is not just food, it's spiritual food. So the person making it actually has in mind, I'm doing this for the sake of a mitzvah. The square matzahs which are machine-made do fulfill the obligation of the mitzvah, but they're kind of missing that aspect to it. So if it's possible to get shmura matzah, I would highly advise it, or highly recommend it, especially since I think our world can definitely use a dose of healing and a dose of faith during these troubling times. Okay, so first of all, besides, before we get into some of the more of the details, I do have a kind of a shopping list. I'll show you very quickly on my screen. But if you want this list of basic items that you'll need for the Seder, we'll go through it together. But if you want the list, I can also email it to you if you want it. So just send me an email when we finish this class. My email is rabbi@chabad.rt. I'll put it in the chat in a moment. Send me an email, I'll send you this Seder checklist. So you need a Seder plate, which is something to hold the different items that we use at the Seder, the matzah, the wine or grape juice for the 4 cups, a hard-boiled egg, a roasted piece of meat or poultry, chicken neck, romaine lettuce, ground horseradish, charoset, a Seder plate vegetable, which is a potato or raw onion, salt water, candles, and a Haggadah. The candles are for before the holiday starts, or even right before the Seder to light the holiday candles. So I can share that with anyone. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and whoever needs that, I can share that with you afterwards if you'd like that. Obviously, that does not include dinner. That doesn't include the brisket, just the basic necessities for the Seder. Okay, so we have matzah. First of all, we spoke about being the idea of bread of healing and bread of faith. If you want to know the deeper significance of the matzah, I should point out, many of us, there's a misconception that people believe the reason we ate matzah is because the Jewish people were rushing out of Egypt and they had no time for the bread to rise, so therefore they ate matzah, which really implies that the matzah has no inherent value. There's nothing special or spiritual about matzah. It's simply they had no time to rise, so they ate matzah. But the truth is, if you look in the story of Exodus, the Jewish people actually ate the matzah the night before they left Egypt. They were already commanded to have a Seder the night before, and one of the items they were commanded to eat was matzah. So matzah has an inherent value, because that night they had plenty of time to let it rise, and all night long. But God said, eat matzah. In other words, there's something inherently valuable about matzah. Besides being a bread of faith and bread of healing, in addition, the matzah also represents humility. It's called poor man's bread. And unlike the chametz, it rises, bread rises, the matzah stays flat, also symbolic of the humility. And this also connects to the theme of freedom, because there is nothing that enslaves us more than ego. Being a slave to one's ego is a terrible thing. If you want to use a very obvious example, an extreme example is if someone always thinks they're right and they know everything, they're very much stuck in their box. They'll never improve, they'll never grow as individuals. It takes humility to recognize there's someone else who may be able to teach me something. Maybe I don't know everything, maybe I'm wrong, and that's the way we grow. And that's a very obvious example. In our own lives, we can always see examples of how we enslave ourselves in our relationships, for example, how the ego can get in the way, that we insist that we're right, and we ruin our relationships. And a certain humility allows us, dose of humility allows us to break free from those restrictions. Moving on, besides the matzah, there's also the second thing that we eat or ingest is the 4 cups of wine. The 4 cups of wine remind us of the 4 different words that God used when he promised he would take us out of exile. And in a sense, the wine is the counterbalance to the matzah. The matzah has no taste, whereas it's considered poor man's bread, as I mentioned. Whereas the wine is something that usually most of us enjoy wine. It tastes good, and especially if you have a good fine wine. Because in Judaism, there are things that we do that we appreciate, that we like doing, right? So we may enjoy Shabbat, We may enjoy certain elements of kosher or whatever it is that we relate to in Judaism, right? The ethics of Judaism. So there are parts of Judaism that we relate to and parts that we don't. There's matzah and wine. There are certain parts we don't relate to, we do it anyway. Out of humility, like the poor man's bread, God says you do it. But that's not enough. There have to be certain parts of Judaism that we have to actually appreciate. And that's the wine parts of Judaism. So when it comes to the Seder, it's the same thing. I found that different parts of the Seder talk to different people, and that's fine. Not everything has to talk to you. Some of it you do because that's what God wants you to do. It's the matzah part of the Seder. Other parts are the wine part of the Seder. And it's important to have both elements in our Seder, the matzah and the wine. When we drink the 4 cups of wine, we lean to the left, and that's symbolizing freedom and royalty and expansiveness. So again, we have the matzah, the wine. The third item is the Seder plate. And I'll go through the diagram of the Seder plate in a moment. Just before we get there, before we get into the details of the Seder, and I move on to the chart that I have prepared. As far as the timing for all this, it should be done ideally after nightfall. Because if we're talking about a certain spiritual energy that exists in the world on a certain time, I mean, just to backtrack for a second, think of Yom Kippur. Many people will tell you that there's a certain, they have a certain awakening or they feel a certain inspiration on Yom Kippur, even if they don't go to synagogue. I've met many Jews who celebrate Yom Kippur out of the synagogue, but they're moved. There's a certain energy and potency of the day. And the same is true with Passover. There's a certain energy, an energy of freedom. The problem is if you do Passover 2 weeks before, and you eat your matzah 2 weeks before, you're missing out on that energy. And the truth is, if you do it before nightfall, it's also the wrong day. It's not the 15th of Nisan. In Judaism, the day begins at sunset. So if you eat your matzah before sunset or before dark, then you're eating it on the wrong day and you're missing out on that tremendous energy. So I would recommend to try start the Seder after nightfall. For those with young kids, it can be difficult, but you can also do other parts of the Seder first if you need to. For example, you can sing your Pesach songs, and you can even eat some salads and fish beforehand if you need to speed things up afterwards. And then at nightfall, you begin with the first cup of wine and so on. Okay, any questions before I move on? No. So let's get into some of the basics of the Seder. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And again, this is something I can share with you if you would like after the class. Okay, so if you should see here at the top of the page is a step-by-step Passover Seder. So let's begin with the Seder plate. On the Seder plate, you have in the top left is the beitzah, the egg. It's a hard-boiled egg. And this is something that we eat at the beginning of the meal, the beginning of the dinner. It's pretty deep into the Seder that we actually eat the beitzah, we eat the egg, and it's dipped into salt water. The reason we have an egg on the Seder plate is because the egg is round, which symbolizes the cycle of life. For example, a mourner, after they leave the cemetery and come back home, the first thing they eat is actually an egg, again symbolizing the cycle of life. So we have this on the Seder to mourn the destruction of the temple, reminds us of the destruction of the temple. On the top right, you have a zeroah, a shank bone. There are different customs to what you use. The Chabad custom is to use a chicken neck, which is easier to find, a roasted chicken neck. So you can get any chicken neck and have it roasted a little bit. And that it reminds us of the Passover sacrifice that was offered every year in the temple on Passover. On the bottom right, you have the charoset, which is kind of a paste. There are so many different recipes for the charoset. It usually has a little bit of wine in it to remind us of the plague of blood. Some people put some apples and nuts, many different customs. You can look online, there's so many different recipes, but this is supposed to remind us of the cement, the mortar that the Jewish people had to use when they built when they were building the towers, the buildings for the Egyptians. Bottom left, you have the karpas, which is the vegetable that we dip in salt water. There are different customs. Some people use parsley. The Chabad custom is to use either a potato or a raw onion, but any vegetable really works. And that again was dipped into salt water, and salt water reminding us of the tears of the Jewish people. The real reason why we dip a potato or a vegetable into salt water is interesting is there's no reason. We actually do it for no reason, because we want to arouse the curiosity of those sitting at the table, especially the children. So on the Seder night, we deliberately do things that are out of the ordinary, just so that the children start asking questions. Because in Judaism, we believe the path to learning is through asking questions. There was a famous Israeli scientist, Isidore Rabi, was once asked, how did you become such a great scientist? What did your parents do when they educated you? He said all the other kids, when they came home from school, their parents would ask them, so did you answer any questions today? And my mother, when I came home, she would always ask me, did you ask any good questions today? Because the key to really gaining knowledge by asking questions. So that's the reason why we dip the potato into salt water. In the middle of the Seder plate and on the bottom, you have the lettuce and the horseradish, the marar. We have two pieces of marar, middle and the bottom, because one is used for the time we eat bitter herbs, the marar on its own, and the other one is when we eat the marar in the sandwich, in the Hillel sandwich. So that's the Seder plate. Underneath the Seder plate, if you have any questions, by the way, you can either put it in the chat or unmute yourselves. Underneath the Seder plate, we place 3 matzot, and each one of the matzot should be separated by either a cloth or a napkin. So you have a napkin, a matzah, napkin, matzah, matzah, and then the Seder napkin, and matzah, and Seder plate. So the Seder plate goes on top of the matzahs. The 3 matzahs, as you can see here, represent the Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, the 3 types of Jews that there are. Okay, so that's, once you set your Seder plate, we're ready to begin the Seder, once we have that in order. That all gets prepared right before the Seder. So you come, I was going to say you come home from synagogue. No one's coming home from synagogue this year. But when you're ready to start your Seder, you set up your matzah, you set up your Seder plate. Then we have a little reflection here, which is optional. And I think it's very practical, especially if you have children at home. And the meditation is that even though I have expectations of how the evening will go, ultimately I'm serving Hashem this evening and things may go differently than I expected. But should that happen, it means that God just wants me to change directions and I'll do whatever is needed from me at that moment. And then it's also, I think, helpful to have a theme for your personal Seder every year. In other words, what am I really trying to accomplish at the Seder? The holiday of Passover is relevant to me at this moment of my life because fill in the blank. Wherever it is that you're holding, what you're trying to accomplish with the Seder, you want to kind of get your mind set on that before you start the Seder. Then the first thing would be to light candles if you didn't do it already beforehand. It's the typical holiday lighting. Then comes the beginning of the actual Seder, the first step. And this Seder step-by-step guide is not complete. What I mean by that is there are actually 15 steps to the Seder. And you'll notice that this step-by-step guide doesn't have every one of the steps because we try to condense it to the basic steps for those who might not go through all of 15. If you're going to do every single step, there's a very easy way to do that. You don't need this chart. You can simply look in your Haggadah. Almost every Haggadah out there has they're annotated and tell you exactly what to do when. So fill up your cup now, wash your hands now. But if you're not going to go through all of those, these are kind of some of the basics that you really want to try and do. So for Kiddush, you're supposed to fill up your cup till it's overflowing. The Talmud says that a house in which the cup is overflowing, the blessings are overflowing. We all need overflowing blessings, so don't be cheap on the wine. Fill up your cup all the way. And then we recite the Kaddish. When it says here passage 2, that's because I have a separate file I can send you also with the basic, most important selections from the Haggadah, the most important paragraphs that you want to make an effort to say if you don't want to do the whole thing. Drink at least a majority of the cup while leaning towards the left. And as I mentioned before, that's a sign of freedom. After that, after the Kiddush is the vegetable, where we take a vegetable and we dip it into the salt water, and there's a blessing that is made over the vegetable, and we eat the vegetable in the salt water. After the vegetable goes the story. So first of all, we break the middle matzah, and half of that, the larger half, is put aside for the afikomen. At this point, you pour the second cup, but you don't drink it yet. A child or an adult asks the 4 questions. In other words, if you don't have children at home, you still ask the question. Even if you're 99 years old or whatever age you are, we ask the question because ultimately the question of Man Nishtan, the 4 questions are not only from a child to a parent, but also from each individual Jew, from each child to our parent in heaven, to God. We ask God, why is this night different than all the other nights? Why is this exile longer than every other exile? Why do we still suffer today? You took us out of Egypt. Why are we still suffering? Why is there still darkness in the world? If we're free, we should be fully free. So we should ask the 4 questions even if you're going to be alone for the Seder by yourself. Okay, then goes the Avadim Hayinu. So after the children ask the question, or you ask the 4 questions, you begin with the answer. The Avadim Hayinu is the first paragraph of the Haggadah. It pretty much captures the entire answer to the 4 questions. Basically, Avadim Hayinu says we were slaves, and now we are free. And that kind of captures or answers all 4 of the questions. If you know the 4 questions, one of them is, why do we eat tonight matzah and not chametz? Another one is, why do we dip twice into the salt water, into the charoset this night? Why do we lean when we drink the wine? Number 3. And what's the 4th one? Why do we lean? Did I say, why do we lean when we drink the cups, right? So the truth is, 2 of those questions are answered by the fact that we were slaves. So Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves, and that's why we eat poor man's bread tonight, and that's why we dip into the charoset, right? On the other hand, now we're free, and that's why we drink the 4 cups of wine, and that's why we lean, and so on. So that first paragraph really captures the entire theme of the Haggadah. And these are some discussion questions or optional questions to make the Passover a bit more relevant and meaningful, the Seder a bit more relevant and meaningful. So for those of us who have children or teenagers, we really have to try and keep them engaged. And one of the ways of doing that is asking them questions or having them ask questions and so on. But if we're celebrating it alone, which some of us will be, I think we also have the option of really delving into the Haggadah. There's so much. It's probably the one Jewish book that has the most commentary, more than any other area of Judaism, is the Haggadah. There are so many commentators that have written so much on the Haggadah that you can sit your entire night and delve into the beauty of the Haggadah and the depth and the richness of the Haggadah. It's amazing how deep these paragraphs are. So if you don't have teenagers nudging you at the table or kids, you can really spend some time on some of these paragraphs and really, especially if you're sitting with your spouse, you can read it together. If you're looking for a Haggadah that has very insightful ideas that are very relevant, the one that comes to mind right away is from Jonathan Sacks. You can do a search, or if you email me, I'll send you the link to it. But Rabbi Jonathan Sacks has a beautiful Haggadah that really has some real, if you're an intellectual and you really like to think, it has some beautiful ideas that are really meaningful and relevant on the Haggadah. And there are so many others else. You can do a search on the internet. There's so many different Haggadahs. Oh, very good. I see Edward's on Rabbi Sachs's chat, his WhatsApp group. He gets his message every day. I get it also beautiful messages, and he compared the 4 questions to the different stages we go through in life. Thank you. Very good. So again, you see how, even if you're an adult at home alone, you go through the 4 questions, and it's meaningful. So there's really, you can just peel off layer after layer after layer. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning, this year is really an opportunity, especially for those who are not going to be with family and you're not going to be with your kids. It's really an opportunity to finally have this very deep and meaningful Seder that we may not have had that opportunity to have in the past. So we'll just read through the first paragraph here. Optional, read and discuss the following thought from the Rebbe. To each of us in our personal lives, the Exodus speaks loud and clear. Free yourself from the obstacles and limitations that stand in your way, preventing you from being what you should be and acting as you should. Moreover, like our constant retelling of the Exodus story, its personal message is perpetual. The personal Exodus you achieved yesterday was marvelous only by yesterday's standards. You have subsequently grown from that experience and is therefore insufficient for the standards of today. So as they say, Judaism, the calendar goes round and around, but it's not like a circle, it's more like a spiral staircase. Every year we celebrate Passover, but we're meant to be doing it in a higher way, in a deeper way than we did the year before. And the same is true every day. Every day we're supposed to be living deeper and higher than we did the day prior to that. Then the next discussion, the next questions, continual progress is ideal but difficult. What is the biggest obstacle to continuing growth? And how can we overcome it? I sent out this video, I don't know if you saw one of the daily videos I sent out a few days ago, was about the British cycling team. And they were pretty horrible to the extent where there was a manufacturer of bicycles in Europe that refused to sell any parts of bicycles to the British team because they figured if anyone sees them using their goods, they wouldn't buy bicycles from them anymore. That's how bad they were. And they hired this new coach. And his whole theory was, it was in 2003, I think, his whole theory was to find a way to improve just 1%, but in every possible area of cycling. So even the padding on the seats, the rubbing alcohol they use in the tires, the pillows that the cyclists slept with at night, just everything just improved by 1%. And within a very short period of time, they had the greatest cycling team on earth. And this is really the message here that in Judaism we believe in these small continuous growth every day and every Pesach, a little bit, 1% more, 1% more, 1% more. and you turn around, and we're completely changed people and improved people. Okay, so once we finish the Avodah Mayinu, obviously if you can go through more of the Haggadah, that would be ideal. Not everyone can go through the whole thing. Not everyone wants to go through the whole thing. So if you can't, then the part that you really want to get to, that's important to say, is the part that discusses the 3 mitzvahs of Passover. Passover, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. The Passover sacrifice, the Matzah, and the Maror, because it says that one who does not say these 3 things does not fulfill his obligation. So that's an important paragraph to include if you can't go through the whole Haggadah. Then finally, after that paragraph, you recite the second blessing on the second cup of wine. So you do recite a new blessing each time. Usually when we drink something in a meal, you don't make a new blessing each time. When it comes to the 4 cups of wine, each one gets its own blessing. And again, you lean to the left. Once you finish with Kaddish, you move right on to Matzah. There are 2 blessings that are made in the Matzah. And again, they're on the other booklet that I put together. And then you can eat the Matzah reclining. So both the wine and the Matzah are to be eaten when reclining. After that comes eating the Maror. You dip the Maror into the Charoset. You're actually not supposed to have a tremendous amount of the Charoset because you're supposed to taste the bitterness of the Maror. And when you have too much Charoset, which is sweet, it takes away from the bitterness. And you do not lean when you eat the Maror because the Maror is to remember the slavery and not the freedom. After the Maror, you can do the sandwich, but it's not on this list because it's not one of the basic requirements to fulfill the mitzvah of the Seder. So if you're going to do the full Seder, then you would eat the sandwich at this point. If not, you can go straight to the meal. You eat the egg from the Seder plate. You have the holiday meal. And if you still have room, ideally to eat the afikoman, the next piece of matzah. And then finally comes the grand finale. There's a 3rd cup with a blessing. You fill Elijah's cup, grace after meal. Then you drink the 3rd cup, pour the 4th cup, the Hallel, the 4th cup blessing, and then next year in Jerusalem. So these are, if you follow these 9 steps, you've completely fulfilled the obligation for Passover 100%. Again, if you can, I would add the steps that we excluded, but this is kind of the I guess you could say the bare minimum. So let me get off the screen share over here. Okay, anyone have any, unmuting anyone, comments? Okay, too much music in the background. Okay, I guess if you have any comments or insights, please share it with us. Or questions, you can unmute yourself. So anyone? Eileen, go ahead. I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
What started the tradition of hiding the matzah? And is that just a modern day version? We do that with our grandkids?
Right. So from what I understand, I may be wrong on this, that began to keep the children interested in the Seder, to keep them entertained. One of the main themes of the Seder is the children. And a lot of what we do in the Seder is built around keeping the children interested in the Seder. What I should add is that there are different customs. Some people, you have the parents hide the afikomen, the kids have to find it. And in other communities, the kids actually steal the afikomen. And then the kids go hide it. And the Rebbe actually wasn't very fond of that custom because why would you want to train your children to steal? We stay far away and so on. We stay far away from anything like that. Good question. Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Neil, please.
Oh, yes, Rabbi Benji, thank you. I'm sorry I kept appearing and disappearing before because I was having trouble with my connection. But Rabbi Benji, I have one question.
Sure.
I had taken the days off for Pesach, but due to the coronavirus pandemic, all my days off have been canceled. So I will need to work on Pesach. And I don't know if I'll be off my quarantine yet. I might be working from the basement here or going into the hospital. I wanted to ask, is there any kind of compensatory blessing or anything I can say since I'm working on Pesach?
So you can still have a Seder, I'm assuming at night.
I'll have a Seder. Yes, I will.
So
I will.
Have your Seder. As far as not being able to observe Passover, that it is what it is. If you have no choice, especially if you're saving lives, and that's saving lives is the way you're observing Passover is by helping people and saving lives.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you very much. Again, if you want any of those outlines or sheets, just send me an email. Have a great evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thank you. Thank you.